The grand palace of Queen Seralia stood like a mountain of silver stone against the skies of Aurelian Prime. Its towers pierced the clouds, its banners shimmered in alien colors, and its gates were carved with symbols older than the human race itself. To Daniel, a human envoy from Earth, the palace seemed less like a building and more like a living creature watching him. He could feel the eyes of the guards, the nobles, and even the servants, studying him as he stepped through the entrance hall. Every movement he made echoed against the crystal floor, reminding him that he was the only human inside a world of strangers. Daniel was not a soldier. He was not a politician of high rank. He was chosen as envoy for one reason: his calm and steady nature. The alliance between Earth and the Aurelian Empire was fragile, held together by threads of trust that could snap at any time. Rumors of war had been spreading across the stars, and peace required gestures of faith. Earth had sent Daniel as a sign that humans could be trusted, that they could walk among the most powerful empire in the galaxy without fear. Yet Daniel felt fear. The palace air was heavy with tension. The alien nobles wore flowing robes decorated with precious stones that glowed faintly under the chamber lights. Their eyes, some gold, some silver, some like pools of black, followed him with unblinking curiosity. He could hear the whispers. A human. Here. What foolishness. Look how weak he is. Why send one so plain? He kept his head steady and his steps even. He reminded himself of his mission, to represent humanity with dignity. No matter how they looked at him, no matter how small he seemed in their vast palace, he would not show weakness. A pair of guards led him into the throne chamber, a hall so vast it could have held an entire city block. At the far end sat Queen Seralia upon a throne of crystal and steel. She was tall, her presence commanding even though she did not raise her voice. Her crown was woven from silver branches that shimmered in the light, and her gown flowed like liquid metal. Her eyes, sharp and bright as stars, fixed on him the moment he entered. Daniel bowed low, as was the custom Earth's diplomats had learned. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "Your Majesty," he said, "I come as a friend of peace, carrying the trust of my people." The Queen did not answer at once. She studied him as though she could see through his words and into his soul. Around her, nobles muttered. Some laughed quietly, others scoffed. To them, a human was little more than a curiosity, a fragile creature from a backwater world. At last, the Queen spoke. Her voice was clear, carrying across the chamber without force-only presence. "Peace is a fragile thing, human," she said, "and trust is not given freely. Why should my empire believe in you?" Daniel lifted his head. He had rehearsed this answer many times on his journey. Because trust is not born from strength, but from choice. You may crush us with your power, but if you choose peace, you will find us loyal. Humanity does not forget those who extend their hand. The nobles stirred. Some whispered approval, others frowned in doubt. The Queen's gaze remained fixed on him, unreadable. Then, with a wave of her hand, she signaled the beginning of the banquet. Tables rose from the floor as if grown from the crystal itself. Platters of alien fruits and roasted beasts appeared, carried by silent servants. Music filled the chamber, strange but beautiful, played on instruments Daniel could not name. He was guided to a seat near the Queen, though still at a respectful distance. He ate little, unsure of the food, though he tasted a fruit that was sweet like honey and sharp like citrus. Around him, nobles engaged in quiet debates. Some spoke of trade, some of war, and some of him, the lone human in their palace. He could feel their eyes, testing, weighing, mocking. He held his calm, showing no irritation. Then it happened. The doors at the far end burst open, and a small figure ran into the chamber. It was the Queen's daughter, Princess Lyra. She could not have been more than 8 in human years, with bright silver eyes and hair the color of moonlight. She wore a simple dress, unlike the noble's finery, and her face was pale with fear. Guards called out, rushing after her. The chamber stilled. All eyes turned to the child as she darted between the tables, her steps quick and desperate. She did not run to her mother on the throne. She did not run to the guards sworn to protect her. She did not run to the nobles, who bowed to her daily. She ran to Daniel. Before he could understand what was happening, the little princess darted behind him, clutching at his leg. Her small hands gripped his trousers tightly, her body trembling. She hid herself in his shadow as though he were her shield. The hall fell into stunned silence. 1,000 eyes turned on them. Murmurs rippled through the nobles like a storm across water. Impossible. The air seeks the human. What trick is this? Daniel froze, his heart racing. He looked down at the child, then up at the queen. He expected fury, or perhaps confusion, but what he saw in Ceralia's eyes was something deeper, surprise and a glimmer of fear. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to pull the princess away. Daniel lowered his voice, speaking gently to the girl. "You're safe," he said. "No, one will hurt you." The child clung tighter. Whispers filled the hall. Some nobles accused Daniel of sorcery. Others whispered of prophecy, of omens. The queen rose slowly from her throne, her gown flowing like a river of silver. "Lyra," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed her shock. "Come to me." But the child did not move. She pressed herself closer to Daniel, hiding her face. The silence in the hall grew heavier. Daniel felt the weight of every gaze, every suspicion, every rumor that would be born from this moment. He had not chosen this, he had not planned it, but the little princess had chosen him, and in that choice the entire court saw something they could not explain. Daniel straightened, keeping his hand steady as he placed it gently on the child's shoulder. He looked back at the queen, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I did not ask for this," he said softly, "but I will not let her come to harm." The queen's eyes narrowed, searching him. For a long, silent moment the hall seemed frozen. Then the queen lifted her hand, signaling the guards to stand down. The banquet continued, though the whispers never stopped. Every noble's gaze lingered, on Daniel and the child who clung to him. The human envoy had arrived in the palace as a curiosity, a stranger tolerated only for peace. Now he stood as something more, an enigma, a question, perhaps even a threat. But above all, he stood as the protector of the queen's child, and everyone in the palace was shocked. The palace had returned to its routines after the attack, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. Soldiers stood taller at their posts, their eyes scanning every shadow. Nobles walked the halls in groups, whispering about loyalty, betrayal, and destiny. And in the heart of it all, a single human found himself no longer a guest but a figure impossible to ignore. Daniel had not asked for the role. Yet, wherever he went, Princess Lyra followed. She refused to sleep in her own chamber, unless he was nearby. She refused to walk the courtyards unless his hand guided hers. Even during lessons with her tutors, her eyes wandered toward the door until Daniel appeared. At first, Queen Ceralia was unsettled. She had ruled for years with strength and certainty. But this bond between her daughter and a human, shook her in ways she could not explain. Her daughter had never clung to anyone before, not even her closest guards. And now Lyra called Daniel her protector. The queen watched silently for days, her sharp eyes never missing a detail. She saw how Daniel spoke gently to the child, never commanding her but guiding her. She saw how he bowed respectfully to servants, treating them with kindness the nobles rarely gave. She saw how he carried himself in the council chamber, steady even when accused or mocked. One evening she summoned him privately. The chamber was quiet, lit only by the glow of crystal lamps. Ceralia stood at the balcony, her silver gown flowing, like moonlight, her crown resting lightly on her brow. She did not turn when he entered. "You protected her twice now," she said, her voice calm but heavy. "Once in front of the court and once against assassins. Tell me, human, why? You owe us nothing." Daniel bowed his head. "Because she trusted me. When a child runs to you in fear, you do not step aside. You stand, even if you are afraid yourself." Seralia turned, her sharp eyes studying him. Do you not fear death? I do, he admitted, but I fear breaking her trust more. The queen's lips tightened, as though hiding emotion. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then softly she asked, and if trust is tested by fire, will you still stand? Daniel met her gaze, unflinching. Yes. For the first time, Seralia's stern expression softened. She gave the smallest nod, then turned back to the balcony. Very well. You may stay by her side. From that day forward, Daniel was no longer just an envoy. He became an unseen guardian, walking beside the child in gardens, standing behind her in council halls, even watching quietly as she played with toys made of crystal. The bond deepened. One morning, as the sun cast golden light across the palace towers, Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor of Daniel's chamber. She was arranging stones into patterns, humming softly. Why do they hate you? She asked suddenly. Daniel looked up from the journal he was writing in. Who? The nobles, she said. She tilted her head, silver hair falling across her cheek. They look at you like you do not belong. Daniel sighed. Because I am different. I am not one of them. Sometimes people fear what they don't. Understand, Lyra frowned. But I understand you are safe. Why can't they see that? He smiled faintly. Perhaps one day they will. The queen overheard this exchange from the doorway. She had come quietly, intending to speak with Daniel about council matters, but instead she paused and listened. Something stirred in her heart, a strange mix of gratitude and unease. That evening she spoke with him again. This time it was not as queen to envoy, but as mother to man. You speak with her as if she were your own, she said. Daniel lowered his eyes. I treat her as she deserves. Not as heir, not as princess, but as a child who needs to be safe. Seralia studied him closely. No flattery, no ambition, only sincerity. She wondered how a man from a distant world could understand her daughter so deeply, when even her own nobles saw only the crown, not the child beneath it. As days passed, the bond between Seralia and Daniel grew as well. At first it was only in conversation, short exchanges about Lyra, about peace, about duty. But slowly the walls began to lower. One night after a long council session filled with angry nobles demanding punishment for the failed assassination, Seralia lingered in the empty chamber. Daniel stood at a distance, respectful as always. She broke the silence. They think I am weak, she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. They fear your strength. That is why they whisper. She turned to him, surprised. You see strength where they see weakness? Yes, he said, simply. Because you hold power, but you do not crush. You lead, but you still listen. That is true strength. For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Trust, perhaps. Respect. A bond not born of politics, but of shared burden. Meanwhile, whispers among the nobles grew louder. Some said the human had bewitched both queen and heir. Others said fate had chosen him. Still others plotted rebellion, unwilling to see their traditions broken. Lord Varrock gathered his allies in secret chambers, speaking of honor and purity. The queen loses herself to the human. The child follows him like a shadow. If this continues, we will bow not to our queen but to earth. We must act. Yet in brighter halls others saw hope. Young nobles, weary of endless rivalries, whispered that perhaps the human's presence was a sign of new unity. The empire was changing, and Daniel stood at the center. One afternoon, Seralia invited Daniel to walk with her through the royal gardens. The paths wound through glowing trees and silver fountains, a place of quiet beauty. Guards followed at a distance, but the queen spoke softly, almost privately. My daughter trusts you more than any of my sworn. I have watched you. You do not seek power, yet power grows around you. Tell me, Daniel, what do you see in us? My people. Daniel thought carefully before answering. I see pride. I see wisdom. I see beauty. But I also see fear. Fear of change, fear of weakness. Sometimes those fears blind you to simple truths, like the truth that a child's trust is the strongest bond of all. The Queen stopped, looking at him for a long time. Then, for the first time, she allowed a small smile to touch her lips. You speak boldly, for one so small in their eyes. He returned the smile. Size doesn't decide truth. That night, Lyra drew pictures on parchment, crude but full of meaning. She drew herself standing with Daniel and her mother beside them. When she showed it proudly, Saralia felt her heart stir. She realized her daughter was no longer afraid, because she believed she was not alone. The bond was real, and it had changed everything. But in the shadows, danger thickened. The nobles who plotted rebellion saw the same bond and trembled with rage. They whispered of gathering soldiers, of seizing the throne before the human could root himself deeper. The Queen sensed the storm coming. She stood at her balcony looking over her city, her mind heavy. Daniel stood behind her, silent but present. They will rise against me, she said quietly. Then I will stand with you, Daniel replied. She turned, searching his face. No hesitation, no doubt, only the steady courage she had come to recognize. In that moment, Saralia realized something she had never admitted, even to herself. This human, fragile and small compared to her warriors, had become more than an envoy. He had become a shield. He had become a voice of truth. He had become part of her trust. And as the stars shone over Aurelion Prime, the Queen understood. The bond they had forged would either save the Empire or draw it into the greatest storm it had ever faced. The palace of Aurelion Prime had always been considered untouchable. Its walls were made of crystal steel, harder than any weapon, and its towers were guarded by soldiers trained from birth. Yet even within such strength, shadows could still slip through. And that night, shadows moved with deadly intent. Daniel knew nothing of them at first. He sat in his chamber, the glow of the small flower Princess Lyra had given him lighting the desk. He was writing notes in his journal, trying to capture the events of each day. He wrote about the Queen's eyes when she questioned him, about the nobles' whispers, about Lyra's trust. But as his pen moved, unease began to grow inside him. Something in the air felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Princess Lyra wandered sleepless. Her dreams had been filled with dark visions, faceless figures reaching for her, a sense of falling, and always the feeling of running. She woke with her heart pounding and her small hands trembling. Without hesitation, she slipped out of her chamber. Guards called after her, but she moved quickly, following instinct. Her bare feet carried her through corridors, across courtyards, and finally toward the one place she felt safe. Daniel looked up from his desk when the door burst open. Lyra rushed in, her face pale, her silver eyes wide with fear. "They're here," she whispered. Before Daniel could ask what she meant, the sound came, a faint scrape of metal, a muffled footstep in the hall. He stood at once, his body tense. Then, the doors slammed wide and figures in dark armor spilled into the chamber. Their blades gleamed under the pale light, their eyes hidden behind masks. Assassins. Daniel had no weapon. He had no armor. He had no training like the guards. But when he saw the child stumble back in fear, instinct replaced everything else. He stepped in front of her, spreading his arms as if his body alone could form a wall. The first assassin lunged. Daniel grabbed the chair from his desk and swung it with all his strength. The wooden frame shattered against the attacker's armor, forcing him back a step. Another came from the side, but Daniel shoved the desk forward, toppling it into the assassin's legs. He moved not with skill, but with desperation, the raw determination of a man who refused to move aside. "Stay behind me," he shouted to Lyra. The child clutched at his leg again, trembling, but obeyed. The assassins regrouped. One advanced with a curved blade raised high. Daniel snatched up the broken chair leg and swung it like a club, The wood cracked against the mask, and the assassin staggered. Daniel's hands bled from splinters. His breath came heavy, but he did not stop. The noise of battle reached the guards outside. Shouts echoed in the corridor. Boots pounded on stone, and more figures rushed, and this time soldiers of the Queen. They clashed with the assassins in a storm of steel and sparks. The chamber became chaos, blades ringing, cries of anger, the crash of bodies against walls. Through it all, Daniel never moved from his place in front of the child. Every time an attacker came near, he blocked them, shoved them, struck them with whatever object he could find. His arms ached, his chest burned, but his resolve never broke. Finally, the last assassin fell under the strike of a guard's spear. Silence followed, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing and the child's soft sobs. The guard secured the chamber, dragging away the fallen. Daniel dropped the broken chair leg from his hand. Blood trickled down his arm, but he ignored it. He turned at once to Lyra, kneeling before her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, tears on her cheeks. "No. You stood like a shield." Daniel gave a faint smile, though his heart was still racing. "That's what protectors." Two of the doors opened again, and Queen Seralia entered with her personal guard. Her eyes widened at the sight. Assassins lying dead, her guards catching their breath, and in the center, her daughter, unharmed, clinging to the human envoy. "Explain," she demanded. One of the guards bowed. "Assassins, my queen. They came. For the princess, the human. He fought them before we arrived." The queen's gaze shifted to Daniel. His clothes were torn, his hands cut, but his body stood tall, still shielding her daughter even though the danger had passed. Lyra clutched, his arm refusing to let go. For a long moment Seralia said nothing. Then softly, almost to herself, she whispered, "Why you?" Lyra answered before Daniel could speak. "Because he did not fear them. Because he did not fear for himself. Only for me." The queen looked at her daughter, then at the human, and a storm of emotions crossed her face. Confusion, gratitude, unease. Finally, she nodded to her guards. "Take the assassins' bodies, find their master, and no word of this leaves these walls. Not yet." The guards obeyed at once. When they were alone, the queen turned back to Daniel. "You could have run," she said. "You could have hidden, but you did not." Daniel wiped the blood from his hand, his breath steadying. "I couldn't. Not when she was behind me." The queen studied him in silence. Her eyes, usually sharp as steel, softened for the first time. She gave a single nod. "Rest, human. You have done more tonight than many of my own sworn to protect her." She took her daughter's hand, but Lyra clung tighter to Daniel. "No, I want him," she cried. "He keeps me safe." Seralia's lips pressed together, torn between duty and instinct. At last, she allowed the child to remain by his side. "Then so be it. But know this, Daniel of Earth, your place in this palace has changed. Some will see you as a hero, others will see you as a threat. From tonight on, you walk a dangerous path." Daniel bowed his head. "I understand." That night, as the palace settled back into uneasy silence, the whispers began again. This time they carried not just suspicion but awe. The human fought with his bare hands. The princess clung to him still. Perhaps it is destiny after all. But in darker corners, others whispered more dangerous words. He grows too close to the queen's child. If the people believe in him, he could sway the throne. This cannot be allowed. And in the shadows beyond the palace, Lord Varrock listened to the reports with narrowed eyes. He saw opportunity not in peace, but in chaos. "The human has become her shield," he said coldly. "Then let us break the shield. When it shatters, so will their fragile trust." The night deepened. The palace lights dimmed, yet within those walls, something had shifted forever. The queen had seen him stand unarmed against blades. The child had declared him her protector. and the nobles had begun to see him as something more than a stranger. Daniel lay awake in his chamber, the faint glow of the loyalty flower still on his desk. His hands ached, his body bruised, but his spirit burned with quiet strength. He had not asked for this role, but fate had given it to him, and deep inside, he knew. The threat had not ended tonight. It had only begun. The news of the princess hiding behind Daniel did not remain inside the throne chamber for long. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire through every corridor of the palace. Servants whispered while carrying trays. Guards exchanged cautious glances at their posts. Even the gardeners working silently in the silver courtyard spoke of nothing else. The heir of the throne trusted the human. It must be a sign. Or perhaps it is witchcraft. Daniel could feel the stares wherever he went. He had been given guest quarters, spacious and decorated in alien luxury, but he found little comfort inside those walls. Whenever he stepped into the hallways, there were whispers. Whenever he sat at a meal, there were suspicious eyes. Even when he stood at his window looking over the gardens, he could sense unseen watchers. The only one who treated him without suspicion was the child herself. Princess Lyra found him easily, as though she always knew where he was. Sometimes she appeared outside his chamber, sometimes in the garden, sometimes in the library where he tried to learn the alien language. She followed him silently, speaking, only in short words, but her presence was steady. On the third morning, she tugged at his hand and whispered, "Walk with me." Daniel hesitated. He knew palace guards would not approve of the princess wandering with him, but the look in her silver eyes left him unable to refuse. So he walked beside her through marble corridors lined with ancient statues. Wherever they went, people stopped and stared. A child of the queen, walking hand in hand with a human. It was a sight no one had ever imagined. When they reached the courtyard, Lyra finally spoke more. "I do not like the nobles," she said softly. "They smile, but their eyes are sharp. You did not smile, but you were safe." Her words struck him with an odd weight. He knelt so he could meet her gaze. "You don't have to fear them when your mother is strong," he said gently. "But if you feel afraid, I will stay close." Lyra nodded as if she had expected that answer. She pressed a small flower into his hand, a pale blossom that glowed faintly in the sun. "This means loyalty," she whispered. Before Daniel could answer, footsteps echoed across the courtyard. A group of nobles approached, their robes trailing behind them, their faces stern. The leader among them, Lord Varrock, carried himself with arrogance. His eyes were narrow, his skin tinted bronze with ridges along his cheeks, a sign of old noble blood. "Human," Varrock said sharply, his voice carrying disdain. "You play a dangerous game. The heir of our queen hides behind you, and you act as though it is fate. What spell have you cast upon her?" Daniel stood calmly, keeping the child behind him without even thinking. "I cast no spell," he said. "She came to me on her own." The nobles muttered, their voices low but sharp. "Impossible. Unnatural. A trick," Varrock sneered. "Children are easily fooled, but this court will not be fooled by you, human. Remember your place. You are here by mercy, not by right." Lyra surprised them all. She stepped out from behind Daniel and glared at the noble with all the boldness of a queen. "He is my protector," she said loudly, her small voice echoing against the courtyard stones. "I chose him." The courtyard fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Daniel's heart pounded. He had not expected the child to speak so openly. Varrock's lips curled into a bitter smile. A child's whim. Nothing more, but whims can be dangerous. He turned on his heel, his robe swirling, and the nobles followed him like a tide. That evening, whispers filled the council chamber. Nobles debated fiercely, some calling Daniel a danger, others claiming it was destiny. A few saw an opportunity. If the child trusted a human, perhaps the empire should consider an alliance with Earth more seriously. Queen Seralia listened in silence. She sat at the head of the table, her face calm, but her mind was storming. She remembered the look in her daughter's eyes when she hid behind the human. It was not a look of confusion. It was instinct, pure and undeniable. Why him? Why not her guards, trained since birth? Why not her own mother, who had sworn to protect her above all else? After the council ended, Seralia remained alone. The great chamber emptied, and the torches burned low. She stared at her reflection in the polished crystal table, searching for answers. Why him? She whispered to herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Daniel stood at the entrance, bowing respectfully. "You wish to speak, human?" she asked. "I only wish to understand," he replied. "If my presence here causes you trouble, I can leave." Seralia studied him carefully. Most men would have begged for her favor or defended their honor. But this one offered to leave even though leaving might mean disgrace. She motioned for him to sit. "You claim no trick, yet my daughter clings to you. You claim no ambition, yet the nobles whisper of prophecy. Tell me, Daniel of Earth, what do you want?" Daniel paused before answering. "I want peace, nothing more. But if your daughter feels safe near me, then I will not betray that trust." There was a long silence. The queen's eyes searched his face for signs of deceit, but she found only calm honesty. She leaned back on her throne, her expression unreadable. "You speak simply," she said at last. "Perhaps too simply. But my daughter is not a fool, and neither am I. The nobles will not forgive this easily. They will test you, and they will watch you. If you fail, peace may break." Daniel bowed his head. "Then I will not fail." That night, while the queen wrestled with thoughts of fate and politics, Daniel sat awake in his chamber. The flower the child had given him lay on his desk, its petals glowing softly. He thought of her words. This means loyalty. He wondered if he could live up to it. The following days deepened the storm. Wherever Daniel went, nobles followed with their eyes. Rumors spread of omens, of ancient prophecies that spoke of outsiders who would stand beside the royal line. Some believed the prophecy was real. Others believed it was dangerous superstition. But through all the noise, one truth stood clear. The child trusted him. One evening, as Daniel walked the gardens, Lyra skipped beside him, speaking in fragments about stars, games, and her favorite places in the palace. Then suddenly her small hand tightened around his. "They will try to take me," she whispered. Daniel knelt, startled. "Who will try?" She shook her head, her silver hair falling into her face. "I don't know, but I dreamed it. I was afraid. And when I woke up, I wanted to find you." Her words chilled him, but he only smiled gently and patted her hand. "Then we'll face it together." The moon of Aurelian Prime rose high above the palace that night, casting long shadows across the towers. In the banquet hall, nobles gathered, again their voices sharp, their plots thickening. Lord Varrock whispered with his allies, their eyes cold. They spoke not of peace but of power, and in her chamber, Queen Seralia stood at the window watching the stars. Her thoughts were heavy with fear and curiosity. The human had changed something she could not explain. Her daughter trusted him. The nobles hated him, and fate itself seemed to be moving. She did not yet know whether Daniel was a blessing or a danger, but she knew one thing for certain. The destiny of her throne had shifted the moment her child hid behind the human. The palace did not sleep in the nights that followed. Guards patrolled every corner, torches burned until dawn, and whispers spread like wind through the halls. The attack on the princess had changed everything. Trust was shaken, and fear hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Queen Seralia knew rebellion was coming. She could see it in the faces of the nobles who bowed too stiffly, hear it in the words that hid too much meaning, feel it in the sudden movements of soldiers loyal to houses other than her own. They had waited for an excuse, and the human's presence gave them one. Daniel also sensed it. Every day he walked with Lyra, He saw guards whispering among themselves, nobles glaring openly, and servants hurrying with lowered eyes. He had lived only a short time in this palace, yet he could feel its heartbeat, and that heartbeat was restless. One evening, Seralia called him to her private chamber. Lyra sat asleep nearby, curled in a chair with a book on her lap. The queen stood tall by the window, her gown flowing like liquid silver in the moonlight. "They will rise against me," she said quietly. Daniel did not ask who. He already knew. When? "Soon," she answered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of her thoughts. "Varrock and his allies cannot accept what has happened. They think I am weak. They think you are dangerous. And so they will come to prove both." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then we must be ready." Seralia turned, surprised by his calmness. "You speak as if you are one of my generals." "I'm not a general," he said. "I'm just someone who refuses to step aside when danger comes. For her—" He nodded toward the sleeping Lyra. "And for you." For a long moment their eyes met. Then Seralia gave a small, almost invisible nod. "Then you will stand with me." The uprising, it began 3 nights later. The palace bells rang in the darkness, their deep sound echoing through every tower. Shouts filled the corridors. Soldiers clashed in the courtyards. Fire lit the skies as rebels stormed the gates, banners of Varrock's house flying high. Daniel woke to the sound of steel. He rushed to Lyra's chamber, finding her frightened but unharmed. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms and ran toward the queen's throne room. The halls shook with the clash of battle. Guards loyal to Seralia fighting rebels who sought her downfall. When Daniel reached the chamber, the queen stood ready. She wore no crown, only armor that gleamed with silver light. A sword rested in her hand, sharp and unyielding. Her eyes blazed with fury, not fear. "Stay behind." "Me," she commanded Daniel as her daughter clung to him. But Daniel shook his head. "I will stand beside you." The doors burst open. Varrock entered, his bronze armor gleaming, his soldiers pouring in behind him. His eyes locked on the queen, then on the human standing at her side. "This ends tonight," Varrock declared. "No, throne shall bow to weakness. No heir shall cling to a human. Step aside, Seralia, or fall." The queen lifted her sword. "You will not touch my daughter. You will not touch my throne." The battle erupted. Steel rang against steel. Guards loyal to Seralia clashed with Varrock's forces in a storm of blades. Daniel held no sword, but he would not stand idle. He fought with whatever he could find. Shields dropped by fallen guards, broken spears, even his bare fists when no weapon remained. He was not skilled, but he was relentless. Again and again he placed himself between Lyra and danger. Arrows clattered. Against shields he raised. Blades struck against armor he held. His arms burned, his body ached, but he never stepped aside. At the height of the battle, Varrock himself charged toward the queen. Their blades met in a crash of sparks. Seralia fought with grace and fury, each strike carrying the weight of her crown. But Varrock was strong, his rage giving him power. Slowly he pressed her back. Daniel saw it. He knew if Varrock broke through, Lyra would be next. Without thinking, he moved. He grabbed a broken spear from the ground and ran forward. Varrock raised his sword for a final strike, only to find Daniel between him and the queen. The human lifted the broken spear like a shield, catching the blow. The wood shattered, splinters, flying, but Daniel did not fall. He shoved forward with all his strength, forcing Varrock back a step. The hall froze for a heartbeat. A human, untrained and outmatched, standing against a noble warrior of ancient blood. That moment was enough. Seralia struck. Her blade flashed, and Varrock staggered back, his weapon falling from his hands. His soldiers hesitated, their leader defeated. Guards loyal to the queen pressed forward, driving the rebels into retreat. The battle ended. The aftermath. The throne room was filled with silence broken only by heavy breaths. Smoke hung in the air, the floor scattered with weapons. Guards dragged away Varrock and his allies, their rebellion crushed. Daniel lowered the shattered spear, his arms trembling. Lyra rushed to him, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "You didn't let them touch me," she whispered. He placed a hand gently on her head. "I promised I wouldn't." Seralia stood before them, her sword lowered, her crownless head bowed for a moment in exhaustion. Then she looked at Daniel, at the human who had stood between her child and death, who had stood beside her against betrayal. Before the entire court, she spoke. Her voice was steady, carrying through the hall. "Tonight this human stood where many of my own faltered. He fought without training, without armor, without fear for himself. He shielded my daughter. He shielded his queen. And he proved that strength is not in blood or birth, but in choice." Nobles bowed their heads, guards pounded their spears in respect. The court, once doubtful, now silent, recognized what had happened. Seralia stepped closer to Daniel. "From this day you are no longer a guest. You are no longer an envoy. You are protector of the heir, guardian of the throne, and ally of the crown." Lyra beamed, her silver eyes bright with pride. She clung tighter to Daniel, whispering, "See? You're my protector forever." Daniel bowed, though his body ached. "I will not fail her. Or you." The queen nodded, her eyes holding his with quiet respect. And so, the human who had arrived as a stranger, mocked as weak and dismissed as unworthy, stood as protector of an empire. The child had chosen him. The queen had trusted him. The palace had witnessed him. And everyone in the galaxy would remember the night a human became shield to a throne.